everyone, and welcome to the Everything Went Black podcast. This week, my fellow horseman, Karl Haikara of the Soul Knocks podcast, joins us for another installment of Darkness Weaves, our deep exploration of the work of Karl Edward Wagner. Before we get into that, I want to shout out the other horsemen of the podcasting apocalypse. Of course, the week kicks off with Horror Wolf 666, brought to you by Brandon Legion. Next up, we have Jackie Smith's Into the Necrosphere. And of course, midweek, we have Everything Went Black. Next up is Necromaniacs, our return with co-hosts Mike Scandato and Jeff Kashid. And to round the work week off, we have John Draper's Spitball Media. Saturday is a day off, but on Sunday, Karl Haikara returns for Soul Knocks. Actually, Karl gives us 2 episodes a week, Thursday and Sunday. And lurking in the margins, we have Iblis Manifestations, brought to you by Cheyenne of the great band Trivax. If you want to support the podcast, please check out our Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can support the podcast. For $5 a month, you get all of the bonus content, plus early installments of the show. The Demon Lord bargained with her that night. In 7 years, he'd draw you back to Raven's Eyrie. In 7 years, he'd come with his hound to drag your living flesh down to hell. Ionor would see her vengeance fulfilled, but the price would be the child. Ionor must take Clest to Raven's Knob, where the Demon Lord and his black hound await. She must give the hellhound your spore by throwing the child into its maw. Then the Black Hound will come for you, Cain, to drag your evil soul down to everlasting torment in its master's realm. And there's no place you can hide from the Hound of Hell. It's no worse than you deserve. All right, guys, welcome to another entry into the Darkness Weaves sub-series that Karl and I are doing. And that was an excerpt from Raven's Eyrie, which was originally published in Chockle number 2, 1977, edited by Pat Cadigan and Artie Feeder. And then it was also represented in the Night Winds Kane collection. And of course, this is one of the several Kane stories that Karl and I are getting into. So how's it going, Karl?
Good. How are you doing, Mike?
Just, enjoying all this Wagner sword and sorcery, man. It's been a very pleasant exploration into this world.
Yeah, I think I'm really liking this so far, and I think that I just did a little kind of shorter podcast for my Patreon about my top 15 fantasy series.
Yeah,
and I'm pretty sure that once we finish all this, once I finish all this Kane stuff, that's gonna shove its way up into the top You know what I mean? Because so far I'm like really loving all these Kane stories a lot. You know.
Well, in general, one of the things I really appreciate about Wagner's approach to this type of fiction is that the complexity of the character too. You know, it's Kane is not just a two-dimensional character. He is multidimensional and also sort of ambiguous as to whether or not he's a hero, especially in this story.
Yeah. I feel like I feel like Kane is, if you got like those guys like, Elric and everybody, like Kane is an anti or I mean Elric's like an anti-hero who's basically a hero. He generally ends up doing the right thing. Kane is completely amoral, right?
Yeah,
And yeah, you're never quite sure, like in this story, he's like a bandit, right? And leading a bandit rate, group. And of course, Conan has been that quite a bit in his stories where he's been bandit leaders and stuff. But you get the feeling that Conan had a kind of moral code of what's
yeah.
right or wrong, which I don't think when we find out about some of the stuff that Kane gets up to in the story, you feel like he doesn't at all.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like Kane, the fact that he's the difference between Kane and Conan, like Conan is a mortal person. He has a finite lifespan. And I feel like consequences have more meaning to a mortal, like a person like Conan. You know, he has consequences to all his actions. If you're immortal and not, and for the most part, unkillable, there's no consequences to anything that you do. And just the long immortal time span of Kane's life has made him very pessimistic to anything that has to do with morality or right or wrong or good or evil. Everything is just this kind of gray area that he lives in.
Yeah, and I think that like we've seen that with all of the stories so far. And I feel like he kind of goes back and forth in the stories between being outright basically the villain of the story to being somewhat likable. And I mean that's the thing is that even though you know that he's like pretty much not a very good guy in a conventional sense, you still like him though. It kind of
Yeah,
reminds me of Daemon Targaryen from like the House of Dragon show.
good call.
Because Daemon's like he's not a good guy, but you can't help but like love him. You know what I mean? I don't know why that is.
Yeah, Daemon Targaryen is my favorite character in House of the Dragon. And it's interesting that you brought that up because I got to be honest with you, like I wasn't really down with House of the Dragon at first. And my lovely girlfriend Tina, who just walked in, hello, she she reintroduced me to House of the Dragon, and we have been I did a deep dive in it, and now I'm like all about it, and I'm looking forward to the new season, which is coming up this summer. And yeah, but Daemon Targaryen is a very good analog to Cain because they are like you were saying, they're just not very good people, but they're flawed, they're self-indulgent, but somehow you find them likable, and they sort of just with the law of averages veer more towards the right side of the line as opposed to the wrong side of the line.
Yeah, I guess you could see it that way. He's like, you know, you get a sense that they have like a certain moral code of some sort, but it's maybe not the normal moral code that most people would see as such. It's kind of like a code of they have their own like kind of twisted code, but that ends up meaning that they do have a certain line that like if you fall outside of that line, you know there's no mercy, right? But I think it all depends. I mean, even like when it's the last story we reread, Kane was like a he was basically like a gang lord. He's basically a gangster. He's like basically the Godfather in last story, but he still overall treated the poet guy pretty well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like if you're his friend, he'll treat you as well as he can. But I do think there's that aspect of time dulling that, and I was, finally I was gonna say, yeah, I really like that. I just finished House of Dragon. I think it was last week or something like that. That's a fucking really good. really good season. I'm hoping that they keep it up with the next season because I'm pretty excited because the next season's going to be even more brutal. I have like um the World of Ice and Fire that Martin did that has like
Yeah.
the history. I know he did like the Fire and Blood one as well, which is just about Targaryens. But you get like the basic Cliff Notes version of all that in the World of Ice and Fire, and it's gonna be pretty brutal. There's gonna be some big brutal battles with dragons fighting each other and shit in the next season. So I think it's gonna be. I hope they pull it off. You know.
Yeah, like I haven't read any of the novels. Like I've only been exposed to the the TV versions of everything. But yet I'm all in, and I imagine someday I'll read all those books. I know that Tina has all the books, so I'll eventually get to those, I think.
Yeah, they're really good books. They're really brutal. There's a lot of depth to them. There's a lot of symbolism and stuff like that I guess kind of got lost in translation with the show. I mean, I love the show, but there's a certain extra layer of depth that Martin put in the books that um gets lost. But I'm kind of waiting to revisit them until at least Winter is announced to be coming out because I reread them. What it was like almost 8 years ago, and I'm just kind of like I want to wait because I hope that he eventually puts out the rest of the series because I'm gonna be really pissed if he dies.
Yeah,
And
totally right.
series has never ended. But anyways, the
So Raven's Eyrie opens up with a prologue, and we're introduced to a young girl named Kless, her mother Ionar, and the nanny Greshna. And Kless is having nightmares about a demon lord and the demon lord's hound. And we also learn that her mother Ionar and her have this kind of sort of tenuous relationship. There isn't a lot of closeness between the two of them. And Greshna is actually the person who she feels close to and has had a larger hand in raising her. So that's kind of put out there in the prologue of the story.
yeah, and I believe that she's supposed to be what 7 years old, right?
Yeah,
Um,
well, seven, and that number seven actually plays kind of heavily into some of the plot elements.
yeah. And we're kind of introduced to this the night of the demon lord's moon or something this night, and she's has like a fever or something going on, but her mother sent away what's her name, the uh,
Greshna.
Greshna, for the night, and yeah, she's pretty cold. She didn't even want to give her daughter water.
Yeah, it's kind of harsh.
Yeah, she's pretty harsh with Quest, and so you kind of get that kind of introduction to the whole thing of her saying like the demon lord and his hound, and then this other figure, which will be important later.
So the Raven's Eyrie is it's an inn which is partially in ruins because it was ransacked by basically coincidentally Kane's group of bandits 7 years ago. So, but it's an active inn, yet some of it has been burned down and is still in ruins.
Yeah, it's kind of like sounds like it's almost like a fortified inn, but when they did the raid, um, yeah, when Kane's group burned, they burned part of it, so part of it's all burned down, part of it's still standing, but they're still running out of it, which kind of crazy to me because I don't know if I had that happen, I probably wouldn't want to stick around.
No, no. So it turns out that now my impression in the timeline of all these stories is that this takes place several, maybe hundreds of years after the Kane's years in Karsutiel, that city that we talked about in some of his earlier stories.
I think if not thousands, because he mentions at one point the Carsuthial steel. And he talks about how that place is turned to dust, and he's the last, you know, last son of the city or whatever. So it makes you wonder, like, I mean, it has to be long enough for a city to basically go down and turn to dust and be all ruined. So it's at least hundreds, if not thousands of years. Yeah.
Probably, actually, you're probably right. You're probably right. Closer to thousands of years. So that's the thing about they don't really go into a lot of detail on that, but that for some reason that resonated with me a lot. Where you're thinking about just the scale of the timeline in which these stories take place, and it would almost be like ancient Egypt, and then thousands of years later, there's this story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would be like if you're in, or even like even better, it'd be like Sumner,
Yeah,
Sumer,
Sumer. Yeah,
yeah. And then now we're in like maybe like,
Roman times or something like that.
exactly, yeah, that kind of sense of scale. And
Yeah,
Kane's just been wandering around doing stuff, keeping himself busy, I guess. He tries out different things wherever he goes, and right now he's being a bandit leader for some probably. And I get the feeling that Kane doesn't need to be being a bandit leader, but he's just doing it because maybe he hasn't done it before, so he's like trying it out. You know what I mean?
that's like the real thing about the character, man. And like you get glimpses into that, like just like the fact of being immortal, and the fact that we're talking about thousands of years passing between the tale prior to this, and I guess like that overarching sense of loneliness and just maybe boredom, and he's like he was in and of in itself, he was a pretty powerful wizard. He has a lot of occult abilities, as well as being a swordsman and warrior. And he's like, you know what? Now I think I'm just gonna be a bandit. So apparently, when we check in with Kane during this stage, he's been reigning terror with this band of villains in this part of the world. And he's like kind of infamous as being this like ruffian, like raiding different towns, and he's kind of like this nefarious like character in that part of the world.
Yeah, they've set a bounty on his head, and we find out that they're being just as the story goes in, they're being chased by this bounty hunter guy who's after Kane, the bounty for Kane, and certain members of his band who have bounties on their heads as well.
Yeah.
And I guess somebody's let loose an arrow into Kane, so he's like wounded when we start off.
Yeah,
Um,
actually pretty gravely wounded. He's unconscious when we first catch up to him. And
yeah,
yeah, so the bounty hunter's name is Pledis, and he's been following these guys in hot pursuit. So there's this almost like a Jesse James kind of vibe to this whole thing. It's like, the sense I got from this part of the story is that he's like this, like almost like a Western sort of vibe to it.
yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of fantasy sword and sorcery stuff that crosses paths with certain Western things, like the writer David Gemmell. Like I think I told you about him. Like his
Yeah.
work, his one of his characters, Waylander, basically reads like a Clint Eastwood character, kind of, but in a fantasy series. And I do think with this story, Karl Edward Wagner is definitely playing around with that a little bit. You know what I mean? With like the bandits, and we got this kind of lone inn that's like kind of half burned down, in the middle of this like kind of like desolate area. It very much sounds like someplace you'd see out in I don't know, Nevada desert or something like that, right? That's kind of the vibe you
That's the
get into
sense
the
I
story.
got from it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a Western cross with like Gothic horror in some ways.
Yeah, this story is very much both those two things. There's a lot of horror. Like as we find out, they're writing. They're in a pretty big hurry because it's supposed to be the demon lord's moon, right? The night that the demon lord goes on his hunt, and gates of hell open basically. And so they're pretty. They want to get inside, away from them. They think that the Pledis guy is gonna like. Surely he's not gonna follow them on the night of the demon lord, right?
Right.
But they and that's when Kane says, "Oh, let's go to Raven's Eyrie." For some reason, even though even though they attacked it and burned half of it down, that's what he says in his like fever that he's in, right? So that's where they make for.
So this brings up an interesting thing with Kane. So he's gravely wounded. But do you think that Kane can be killed?
I don't think so. No, maybe if you cut off his head or something,
Yeah.
that, like to that point, maybe that would kill him, right? I don't think, but we don't know. We don't know if like you know his head and body would like reform together or something like that. Like we don't really know the details of how he's immortal, but I would imagine that much like a vampire or something, if his head got cut off, he'd probably die. But I don't think he's gonna die from a basic wound. I think it'll look like he's gonna die, but then he just won't. You know what I mean?
Because that's kind of like a point. That's like an element of the story as to what the deal is with him. Like, he's mortally wounded. He's like, they think he might die, but I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up because that's actually kind of like an important element of the story. So they get to Raven's Eyrie, and Einar, for reasons we'll get into, has this like hatred and disdain for Kane.
It's like a raging hatred. It's like pure black hatred towards him,
Yeah.
and this is when we find out that like we said, Kane and his band had raided the inn, and he carried her off with him for a while to be like his like concubine or whatever, and they also like raped and murdered her sisters and stuff like
Well,
that.
yeah, it's like actually they go into a lot of like detail about like how Kane murdered her family and then like he gave her sister to his men and how her cries like haunted her and everything. It's like pretty heavy duty stuff, man. And this is like the guy that we're supposed to empathize with. This guy's basically a rapist, murderer, bandit, like criminal.
Yeah, and he like tells her like I could have made you forget. Like I guess he's talking about he's gonna maybe do some spell on her. You know what I mean? Like to make her forget. Well, we got introduced to this character in the very first story. He had like a undead, mistress he kept bringing back from the dead every time she tried to kill herself. So you know what I mean?
Yeah, we know he's not a very good guy.
So I'm guessing he kind of had his thoughts for with Ironor, but so you're really like okay, he literally let he murdered like her family, like basically let his men like rape and murder her sister. You're like okay, yeah, I mean Kane's definitely not a good guy.
Yeah. So there's this whole like conflict between the two of them. And but Kane throughout a lot of this, he's unconscious. So they put him in a room basically, and it's believed that he died, but what it seems it's almost like he slowed down all of his bodily functions and heart rate and everything to this point where he appeared to be dead, but he was actually recovering.
Yeah, and that's because Pledis shows up and he
Yeah.
kills some of the guys. There's like Kane's like number two. They take captive and murder a bunch of the other guys. And when they go to when they lead him up to where Kane is, he's like in this death-like trance, basically. Like we mentioned, like he seems like he's dead, but then we find out that he put himself into this death-like trance in order to convince them that he's dead, basically. And then like we were saying, like he's not. I just don't think things like a wound like what he has can really kill him. It'll put him down for a while because I mean, next thing he does is he crawls out of the window since he knows the guys are there, and he knows he can't jump down because if he jumps down, they'll hunt him down. He knows that if he'll leave the stuff, so what he does is he climbs to the next window over and breaks in, and that happens to be what's her name? The girls room. Yeah,
Kless's room,
yeah.
the young girl. So right then and there, she that you identify there's a striking family resemblance between the two of them.
They both have very bright blue eyes.
Red hair, and that Kless claims that she can see really well in the dark, which is like an ability that Kane has, like to see in the darkness.
Yeah, and she basically straight up says like calls him father. Like she knows that he's her father, and she's not afraid of him or anything. Like it's almost like she knew that he would be here because of her dreams. So she knows that she doesn't want to betray him. Like, but they find out that he's not in the other room. They're like searching around. He knows he's got to get away. So he goes into the closet and figures like worst case, I'll murder them or whatever. And the guys come and they come in and ask her if he's been in there, and she says no, and all this stuff. And then when they open the closet, Kane's not there. So that's when we find out that this inn has some pretty dreadful secrets.
Yeah, like not only that's the thing, and that's kind of like interesting about this story is like no one is really good in this story except for maybe Kless.
Yeah,
Kless
no
and
one is.
Greshna is actually pretty virtuous too, but no one in this. Everyone is kind of like evil or tainted in some way or is acting out because we learned that the Ravens Eyrie wasn't just your run of the mill inn. It was like a murder inn where like if people of means stayed there, that these passageways would connect to their rooms, and they would, if you had like riches with you, they would kill you and then take all your stuff, your gold and your valuables, and that's part of like what would happen at this place.
Yeah, and then they would disappear you basically. So they had like all these there's all these tunnels that because Kane basically falls down this trap door that he accidentally set off that has there's like a ladder leading up to that room, and he breaks it. And when he lands, he sees that there's like a water, there's like this underground thing, and then there's like an underground river. So he's like, okay, so they can just throw dead bodies into this river and then they disappear basically. And we also find that out too because what's her name?
INR.
Ionor murders what's her
Greshna.
name? Greshna, and Greshna comes back because Greshna has basically figured out what's going on, and that's when we kind of learn that Ionar is planning on has made some deal with the Demon Lord, basically that she's basically sacrificed her daughter so that he can take Kane back down to hell or basically or something like this. So she murders her Greshna, and they throw her down into this in this underground part. That's how Kane finds her body. I think he kills the guy who was bringing her body down as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think they refer to it as sinking a body or something like that. There was a term they used.
Yeah.
So this whole 7-year period, that was part of like this plan, this like pact that INR made with the Demon Lord that 7 years later she would deliver Kane, and she would also sacrifice her daughter Kless, his offspring. But there's even like this perception, this like sort of that Kane was being drawn to Raven's Eyrie, as well as just randomly showing up there. That there was like these forces at work that were putting him back 7 years later at that location.
Yeah, that is mentioned particularly a little bit later on. So it makes you think that it wasn't just because they were close by that he said let's go to the Eyrie. I think there's some manipulations going on as well. Along with the fever, because here soon, when that's kind of described, then all of a sudden his fever and all that stuff breaks, and he's like pretty much perfectly fine. You know what I mean? So
yeah. So this whole little drama had like this air of like inevitability to it.
Yeah, but yeah, and the thing of like that kind of idea of the inn. Do you remember the Howard story at I forget the name of it, but it's one with like the man eaters and Zambula or whatever, where yeah, where he's like in the inn where they have send the guy in to try to like murder people, and then they feed them to the man eaters or whatever.
Yeah, no, it has that same sort of vibe to it. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so now they're searching vast and wide. So now it's it's nighttime. It's full on. The Demon Lord's moon is out. All of a sudden, like there's like tons of fog everywhere. And the old lady isn't quite dead. She does tell Cain what's going on, like with her last dying breath. She tells Cain like that Arnor is planning on sacrificing Kless to the demon lord and all this stuff. So, and Cain. Here's where Cain's like decided him that's not all bad. He feels a need to basically stop her from killing his daughter. Like he automatically has this sense that I gotta take care of her. It's my daughter. Like I can't let her kill her. So now you're like, okay, so it's not Cain's not necessarily all bad, right? It's kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah, even though he like raped this lady, killed her family, and like burned down her like he's like, well, the young girl, we'll try to save her,
Yeah. I guess it's checks and balances, right? Although ironically, he ends up being I mean, that inn was like a horror show, so I guess he inadvertently did by burning it wasn't necessarily the worst thing he did in a way.
This is true. I didn't think of that actually. The fact that he did like kind of rid temporarily, like, interrupt this like murder in, scam that was going on. It's kind of positive.
Because they do say that ever since the owner came back, like she hasn't been using the secret ways and murdering people, so it's kind of interesting. But yeah. So now begins the part where Kane's trying to. She has to take Kless up to what's it called, Raven's Knoll or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like a rocky outcropping where supposedly a demon lord comes down, and so Kane is, he climbs out through following the river up and he can see the Raven's Knoll. He's trying to get up to it, and he comes to a certain point where the path widens out, and this is when he comes face to face with the demon lord. And this is when we learned that the fever was caused by the demon lord. Basically the whole thing, like he's like demon lord's like trying to tell him like, I've been manipulating all this stuff, and Kane's like, this pisses Kane off because he's like, I don't play any I don't let anybody play me, basically, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so there's like the demon lord has been sort of in the background of Kane's life for several years, for probably thousands of years, really. So he's been like this kind of hidden hand, like moving pieces of his life at some point.
Well, it sounds like that they've worked together in the past, right?
Yeah.
And he says occasionally calls him Satanas. So we know that this is like the devil, basically.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Because they talk about has different names. He has different names everywhere, and one of them is Satanas, spelled like kind of weird. So we know this is basically like the devil, and Cain and the devil have worked together, but Cain doesn't want to be manipulated. That's his big thing that pisses him off. You know what I mean? Like, so, like basically it's a game now between him because he doesn't want to go to hell, and he wants to prove to the demon lord that he can't be pushed around. Basically, you know what I mean?
I wonder, like, I don't know, there's thoughts that this is Cain from Cain and Abel, and I'm curious as to like Christian mythology, like the Cain character and Satan, or Lucifer, like what actual, if any, connection they might have had in the Bible. Are you familiar with any of that?
Yeah, I mean, with Cain, there's in like Hebraic mythology, Cain is basically the so the idea is that he's the older son, and that actually there's certain Hebraic mythologies where either Samael and Lilith entered into the bodies of Adam and Eve, or that Samael or Satan had sex with Eve, and thus Cain is of the seed of Satan, essentially. That this is in a lot of the old myths. So he's not actually, he's like half like this being of fire and half human, essentially. in the story in certain Hebrew mythology, so that he's not even though technically him and Abel are brothers because of the mother, like they're not necessarily the like true brothers in the sense of like Cain is something more than a man essentially.
Gotcha.
But so that's part of the Hebrew mythology that's there. And of course, in a lot of Hebrew mythology as well, when Cain goes east of Eden after he's banished, he found civilization, creates like, becomes like a kind of blacksmith. There's all this types of mythology of him being, you know, this kind of figure. So I think that you could see some of that in the actual Cain in these stories. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I just wasn't completely certain on how this stuff connected.
In the Bible, it doesn't necessarily. Some of that stuff's. I don't think it's necessarily 100% in the Bible, but it's in like Hebrew mythology from back from the same time period, essentially.
Right on.
But yeah, so then they're basically we're down to like kind of a chase, and a few things are going on because you got the bounty hunters are trying to hunt down Cain, but they're going out in the demon lord's mist, and you can hear like screams going on like in certain areas, like something bad's happening to some of them. Cain comes to a certain point where he has to climb a wall, which is pretty like a sheer cliff wall, and it's like that's a pretty brutal part where he's like using his knives to like get himself up this like sheer wall.
Right.
But I almost laughed though in the part where he gets to the top of the wall finally, and the guys who are hunting him are there, and right where he comes up and he's like basically like covered in blood and like screaming. He's like has this like fury, and they all like get scared and like try to run away. He like cuts them down.
Yeah, no, totally.
It's just kind of funny the way that he wrote that part. Um, and that's when he gets the crossbow, right? So that he
Oh
uses.
yeah. Yeah, I forgot about that part. Yeah.
Yeah, because then when he gets up to the top, there's like a trail leading up to the top of the Raven's Point or whatever it's called, and he can see Ionor leading class up there, and you can see the Demon Lord with his hound and everything like that. And then that's when he jumps out, and Kless is trying to drag. I mean, Ionor's trying to drag Kless up to feed his hound or whatever, which is pretty horrible.
I mean, also the hound's Cerberus, right? It's like some bizarre spelling of Cerberus.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it once again connects like him actually being Satan, this demon lord.
Yeah, it's like Satan or Hades or what all these different. It seems like Wagner's positing like that this is some force that's eternal that has all these different names essentially, and is known
Yeah.
by different things. Kind of like how like when you read the Sandman, like Orpheus has all these or not Orpheus, the Dream King has all these different names. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, totally.
But then you got basically Cain stops her though, and basically just fucking crossboats boats her to the tree, this tree, like, and she like is like, it's funny how he describes it because it's like it hits her and it flings her back into the tree like 7 feet or something like that. It sounds like kind of like cartoonish in a way.
I mean, it's like such a in some ways it's like poignant, where this woman's her whole life really, I figure the last 7 to 10 years of her life, 7 years have been devoted to bringing down Cain, getting some kind of retribution and vengeance on him, and the hatred she has for him manifesting in her willingness to sacrifice her daughter to the demon lord in order to bring retribution on Cain but yet he just like kind of dispatches her like that, and it's all the whole thing was really for nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what you get with this is the idea of the will. Like Kane's will is stronger. Like it's stronger even than the demon lord, right? So,
Yeah,
and that's something that's mentioned on is like Kane's will and will to survive and will to exist is just happens to be stronger than even the powers of the devil or this, this whole situation,
yeah,
which yeah, say like fucking asphyxies her to this tree, and then the demon lord's like, well, looks like you won this time, Kane. Like, and but thanks for bringing all these people for my hunt. Which sounds like that was more of his. You almost get the feeling like Satan was like maybe didn't think he was going to succeed. You know
yeah.
that.
It's like it's
Yeah.
interesting at the end where he's just kind of like, it's like, let's just see how this plays out. There wasn't a lot of intention in it, and he kind of knew that he was putting these pieces together, and that it would just be this like kind of ruinous, like almost comedy of errors in some ways.
Yeah. But then with doing all this, then Kane, all those guys, all of the bounty hunters and stuff that Kane that were following Kane, trying to track him down, now are going to be hunted by the demon lord. So he's still got his fun for the night, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
the and of course, so yeah, the story ends with like Kane bringing Kless back to the Raven's Eyrie, and his number two is still alive. He was like hanging by his thumbs or something horrible like that,
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and and he tells them, gives them a bunch of gold, and tells them to like like take Kless down to the city with him, and he's gonna deal with if any bounty hunters come back to the place, he'll take care of him, and then he'll meet him in the town. And yeah, then the story ends with was it named Pledis or whatever? Somehow is still alive. He's all like bloodied and horrified, and he comes into the inn, and he doesn't realize that all of his guys are dead basically, and Kane's waiting for him essentially. So
yeah. Another good one, man. It's yeah. This was like once again, it had like almost like a Sam Peckinpah esque. If like Sam Peckinpah was telling a dark fantasy horror story.
yeah, and I feel like again, if a lot of stories, Wagner's playing on some of the tropes of certain aspects of sword and sorcery. So you got like I said, Conan was a bandit leader quite a bit in the Howard stories, right?
Yeah,
And I think that, um, so I think it's very purposeful putting Kane in this position as a bandit leader, and then you can kind of see the, I guess you could say the compare and contrast between Conan as bandit leader versus Kane as bandit leader, and how much more brutal Kane is.
it's completely amoral, and like, yeah, it's one of the things that Howard in all of his characters, like there is, even though they're barbarians, they have like this kind of code of conduct that they follow. But with Kane, he's like completely like chaotic, really. I mean, he's following no code besides survival and his own self-interest, really.
Yeah. Did you start the Solomon Kane stories yet?
Not yet. I got to dig the
Okay.
book out of a box that I have. That's like, believe it or not, I'm still unpacking in my apartment.
I can believe that. Yeah, it takes me forever to unpack.
Oh yeah,
The yeah, the Del Rey Solomon Kane is beautiful. I love the illustrations in it.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I've had the book for a while, that collection, and I've read the adaptions that were in the Savage Sword of Conan like years ago, and I've read maybe one or two of the short stories over the years, but never just the entire, group of work, really.
Yeah, I did that a few years ago. I read the whole book straight through. But I think that the Solomon Kane's a kind of interesting character because he's not necessarily chaotic in the way that Kane is, but he's like on the surface he's like this Puritan who has these things, but then at the same time he's also acting and totally unpure at Puritan. He's like acting basically for the love of adventure and in a way, but he won't admit it to himself because he's have his puritanical hardness. So Solomon Kane's a very kind of strange character in a lot of ways, even for Howard, I feel like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into those stories. But yeah, that's a big goal of mine is to get through that entire thing.
Yeah, those are really cool stories. I mean, there's a lot of really great, you know, parts about with Howard speculating on certain pessimistic philosophies and stuff like that in those stories. But yeah, dude, like I'm really loving these Kane stories. I need to try to find the. I need to try to finally get like some paperback versions of the Kane novels too. Like, I know the one guy on Instagram had them all like at one point, like the whole like what is it, 4 novels,
Yeah.
but they were $30 a piece. So I was like,
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I have those actually. I bought those when I was a kid, like with the Frazetta covers, and just I got them for whatever cost they were back in the 80s, So it's like that stuff's been in my collection like all these years.
yeah. I wish I had known about Howard when I was a kid, because or not Howard, I mean Wagner. Because I'm sure that back in the '90s, I probably could have found them pretty easily in paperback format in just a used bookstore. Like
Oh yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that you could buy back in the '90s for like $2-3 at a used bookstore. And nowadays, everybody knows, oh, that's worth money, so then they put it online or whatever. So it's like it's harder to find certain things for cheap at in bookstores now. You know what I mean?
Oh, definitely, and I just sort of like stumbled onto Karl Edward Wagner because there was like the fantasy section in this bookstore. It was like a literally the name of the place is called the Book and Record Store. That was the name of the shop, and it was in my hometown, and it was like next to like the shop in the shopping center that my mom would go to for grocery shopping. So I'd go with her, and I would just go there, with a
Right.
couple of bucks or whatever, and they had like Motorhead records, like Ramones albums, Iron Maiden, and then there was a really intense like fantasy section and horror section, and they had like Lovecraft and like Stephen King and all the Conan, like Robert E. Howard stuff. And then within that same section, I found Death Angel Shadow, and Bloodstone, and they literally I got them because they had Frazetta covers, like the Conan books,
Yeah.
and that's how I got into Karl Edward Wagner. And then like years went by, and I only really knew him from the Kane stories, but then I realized that he had all these other horror stories, and I started checking those out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If I had seen the covers, like if I had been browsing in a bookstore and I found the Wagner books back in the day, I would have bought them just for the covers too.
Oh
You know
yeah,
what I mean? Because I was already collecting, Frazetta covers like the Conan, or I'll basically buy any book that has a Frazetta cover on it. You know what I
pretty
mean? Like,
much. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other stuff during that time frame that wasn't that great that I got into, like that was like kind of forgettable, like I mean, I know that John Norman, his like gore novels have like a big following in like the S&M, like BDSM community or whatever, because it's like I had a few of those like novels, and I'm like, I was a young kid and I'm reading them and I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. And I'm like, man, it's like there's always like women being like whipped and like, like smacked around and like, tied up and everything. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about all this stuff. You know what I mean? And even like the covers had like I think it was like Boris Vallejo did some of the covers, and it was always like women being tied up and stuff. And I was like, yeah, I don't know about this, but it's kind of weird, as a young kid. But and the stories are decent. There's a ton of those like gore novels, and yeah, I don't know. I haven't tried to read them again, but I have a few of them still at home.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the gore novels. I know I can see the covers, like the Boris Vallejo covers and stuff, but I never actually read them. I think I might have one of them, in my, that I bought a while ago that I haven't read. It kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you ever read the Sword of Truth series by Terry Goodkind,
No, I haven't. No.
but there's like some weird like S&M stuff going on in those books too. And I remember I got the Wizard's First Rule like in the '90s, like when I was adolescent or whatever, and it was like I remember reading that the first time and going, "What? You're not really understanding the weird like S&M undertones of
Nah,
certain
not at
parts of
that
it." You know
age.
what I mean?
Definitely not. I was like, wow, this is kind of weird, man. I don't know. Like, And yeah, then also of course the Burroughs work, like all the John Carter stuff was like right there in that same section. So I got into like all the John Carter Mars, Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff. Now, I know that you're a Tarzan reader, but I never really read any of those.
Yeah, I got the whole Tarzan series when I was a kid. I still have a collection here. The I haven't read them since I was a kid though. I read them, growing up. I don't know if they're still how good they are going back. You know what I mean? Like, but I do remember liking the Tarzan stuff, and obviously, I think we were talked about the whole what Lost City,
Oh yeah,
the underworld, the Hollow
Pellucidar,
Earth,
yeah.
yeah, Pellucidar. Because you bought that collection, right? The
Oh yeah,
Pellucidar,
dude.
yeah,
That's great. It's like one big book that has all the stories in it. It's killer.
yeah. I need to get that because I just have some of the individual novels from back in the day. But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Back in at one point you could find so much good shit in the used bookstores, and you still can. I mean, it just depends on the bookstore. Um, I keep looking for the Wagner stuff. Like, if I go to a used bookstore, just to keep my eyes open, because you never know. Maybe I'll walk in and it'll be like the Kane's novels for $5 each or something like that. You know what I mean?
I mean, I hope that like our buddies at Valancourt Books like pick up on this stuff too, man, and they'd start doing these things because they did the In a Lonely Place collection, and oddly enough, it's like I talked to the folks over at Cadabra Records too. Like I'm like, man, have you guys ever read any Karl Edward Wagner stuff? Like even the like Sticks, and stuff like that. And those guys are just not familiar with it. And I'm surprised. I'm just like, man, you guys are into like Mark Samuels and, Thomas Ligotti and, Michael Shea and like all these authors. And it's like, you should check out Karl Edward Wagner, and get one of your sick, like, narrators to read some of these stories, put out a vinyl version of it or something.
It would be really sick if they did Sticks and then had somebody
Dude.
do the kind of artwork that looks like the Whispers covers, and
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that would be really sick.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that the thing I was gonna say about these Kane stories is this was like grimdark before there was grimdark, right? This is like
Yeah.
the 70s. Kane stuff was coming out. Fantasy was not necessarily a hot thing in the 70s. It really took off in the 80s. I mean, you had like Catherine Kurtz and Paul Anderson did his Broken Sword novel, and Moorcock was doing Elric, but this was, I feel like it wasn't really, this one fantasy was just first starting to really take off when Tolkien was released in paperback and everything, like, so Wagner was really ahead of his time in so many ways, you know what I mean?
I feel like the 70s are more about science fiction, maybe, you know what I mean? Like as opposed to
Yeah.
fantasy.
Yeah, it was like the beginnings of the fantasy stuff, but a lot of people have pointed out that fantasy really took off in the 80s. Like that was when, which I do think, I think I was like when the golden age of fantasy, one of the golden ages of fantasy was definitely in the 80s because you just had so many good, great fantasy art, great fantasy novels. It was a pretty cool time. And then of course, I think D&D was part of that. The popularity of
Yeah.
D&D and
Oh
stuff
yeah.
like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, for a couple summers, I was heavy into D&D. I remember, I mean, I would have continued with it, but there was no one else that was into it really, just one dude and then he moved away.
Yeah, I was into it, but I didn't have any to play with. I just buy the books, which is pretty pathetic. Like I will buy the deep role playing books and just read them for my own enjoyment.
I should have did that. I couldn't find anyone to play with myself, honestly.
Yeah, I didn't have anyone to play with really, so I just read the books because I liked them. It's pretty fun.
Also, Kane, like, you know, should get a treatment like Conan did with some comics too. I think that would be incredible.
And did you see that thing I sent you, where I guess like some one comic book publisher has picked up, but this was a couple years ago. So I don't know what the status is, but I guess there's supposedly a Kane comic in the works.
Right. I
So
remember that, but it's like, where is it? That's what I mean. Like, I want to read these things.
yeah, I would love it. I mean, I hope that actually happens. What I want to see Titan books.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Let's have Titan pick up Kane like they did Conan, and that'd be
yeah.
perfect. You know what I mean?
I'm excited about Savage Sword with Titan.
Yeah.
And the Conan the Barbarian stuff is really cool, and like you kind of like hip me to that, so I'm kind of stoked.
Oh yeah, the new Conan the Barbarian Titan series is really good, and Savage Sword is coming out this month, I think, or next month. I forget
Yeah,
which.
this month in
This
February, I think
month,
it's supposed to come out. Yeah,
yeah. And then on top of that, this month, I know you're not a big fan, but this month they're putting out I think it's Arrow. It's putting out a deluxe edition of Conan the Barbarian, the movie of Arnold.
yeah. I
Um,
mean,
and it has that one, it has the Destroyer too. But what's cool is it has the extended version cut and has all these bonuses and stuff. I already pre-ordered it.
yeah,
So
I'll probably get that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm more of a fan of the novels and the comics, but the movie's all right. You know what I mean? Like, it's not my favorite thing in the world, but like, I still back it. You know what I mean?
yeah, and yeah, I saw that this, and I'm like, I've never seen the extended cut. I know it's not that much longer, but I'm still, you know, keen to check it out. I mean, I loved the movie ever since I was a kid. I mean, obviously, I knew about the comics and the stories before I saw the movie, even, but the movie definitely made a big impact on me when I saw it when I was probably way too young to be watching it. But
Oh yeah, I definitely. My dad took me to see that in the movie theater. I remember.
yeah,
Yeah, I was like, still a young kid when it came out.
yeah, because I think that came out in what 83 or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But yeah, so I guess February is the month of Conan, right? So you got Savage Sword coming out. You got that new deluxe Blu-ray, and yeah, Titan's still putting stuff out. So like definitely anybody's listening to this should definitely, if you like Savage Sword, I'm excited. I think they're gonna do a good job too because you know I think that from some of the art previews I've seen, it basically just looks like old school Savage Sword. So.
I'm totally down for that because that was my favorite thing back in the day for sure.
And you got Beast Story of Solomon Kane too. I saw that. So
Yeah, you can't go wrong with that.
it's gonna be
Yeah.
sick.
Well, dude, thanks again for once again for doing this thing, and I'm looking forward to getting into our next story in this series. And
Me too.
yeah,
I'm
everyone out
gonna
there, if you're interested at all, try to go out, get the stuff. It's only on Kindle right now, unless you can find it used somewhere. But let's all try to, petition, man, and get get Kane back into publication somehow. That'd be great.
oh yeah. And have a good tour.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Like I said, within less than 2 days, I'll be heading out. So I'm looking forward to getting out there on the road again.
Yeah. It's only like a month around like
Not even.
not even a month, it's like 2 weeks or something, right? So
It's like 2.5 weeks, just a little under 3 weeks. It's all on the East Coast in Canada. We're not going out west or anything like that.
yeah. You don't have to go very far. I mean your last date is in Brooklyn, so
No, that's great. It starts in Providence and ends in Brooklyn. So it's the first time in a while that we haven't had to drive across the country to start a tour.
yeah, because you can literally finish the show that night and just go home, which is
Oh, dude, that's the best part about it. I'll be home that night. Yeah, it's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
All right, Carl. Thanks a lot, man.
Cool man,
Take
have a
care.
good night.
You too now. Bye-bye.
Bye.